Another week, and it's interesting. Yeah, just even the tone of our conversation, I feel like that's the tone for a lot of people are kind of settled into this new,
Yep.
our new normal. And the news has been good just about what Oregon has been able to do as far as keeping cases down, and things are steadying out. And we've been looking at, you know, what the market's going to do. So we've got some really good stats to talk about, and I'm just curious too, just to hear from you, like what you're seeing. And I know you sent out a lot of information to all your clients. You wrote a pretty thorough letter about where the market was and the resources. And now we've been open for a week for the PPP, so people getting some assistance. Are you noticing anything different just as far as like call volume or what you're seeing, what the conversations with your clients are? And two, I'd love to hear about lenders you're talking to too and what they're seeing.
Yep. Just real quick then, our buyer pipeline hasn't really changed since a week ago. So we had a couple of Zoom calls within the last 2 to 3 weeks that are kind of new buyer calls. Hasn't really changed. Well, that's not true. We had one more call from a local sort of larger company executive wanting to get into the market. So they really have a unique position on the understanding of the forecasting of the Portland market, both this term and next term, based on the size of the company that they're a leader of, you know, like, yeah. I don't know how many thousands of employees. And that person wants to get back into the market and really start shopping.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like scream and deal, get an opportunity, really just like, cool, we think that there's an end and we think that we're okay on the other side. And we think that this makes sense for us. So that was one sort of anecdotal data point. That and the 2 Zoom calls have been our new buyer pipeline for the last 3 weeks. So that's like not a large volume. That's certainly down from the rate of things that we would normally be in right now, but it's also not zero. The buyers in transactions so far are progressing. We did have one sale fail, but just the one. And we got a couple that are in inspection period. On the seller side, we have a couple of inspection period. We have a listing hitting today in Sherwood at about 500. It's 475. We have a 600 listing in St. John's. Beautiful farmhouse, 4 beds upstairs, unpainted work, little art studio outside. It's a lovely house. And that's hitting next week. So that's what we have in the pipe and what's happening now. It'll be interesting. Next week, our calls about the Sherwood property and about the St. John's property will be, that'll be like top of mind for me, is like how traffic is. Our Southwest listing at 600 is getting regular and steady traffic, and we've had some offer interest and little nibbles, little bites. Nothing stuck yet, but it's certainly not a devastating slow thing. I was talking to them about supply and demand, because at the root of everything is supply and demand. And what I see right now, there is not a huge influx of inventory and probably not a big growth in buyer pool either. So not an increase in supply or demand, you know, so like lesser than we would have seen last year for sure. But it doesn't seem like we're trending downward. My hope is that we from a number standpoint have hit a place where the those that are laid off and furloughed it's happened. I think a lot of people were really quick to jump the gun on that, especially smaller businesses. And I think our whole story right now is going to be employment for the next 3 months. Like that's the basis of the whole story.
Yeah.
Those that were furloughed or are being furloughed or are being, like the Redfin agent I was working with was one of.
Talk about that a little bit. So you're in a deal, you're mid-deal. Redfin laid off 40%.
41%.
Yeah, of their brokers. So
of the brokers, yeah, and staff, but their brokers 41%.
41%. So how did that affect your deal?
So far, not at all. She handed off to her, like, they run it more like a traditional sales organization, so they get paychecks and salaries and things like that. The person just above her is somebody that's been in the business for a long time, Alex Stoltz, and she's been and Liz is the person. Liz Ellis is the agent that got laid off. So Liz told me, you know, I called her and said, hey, I heard the news. She said, we're finding out in 10 minutes. She called me 10 minutes later. She goes, I can't believe this. I'm getting furloughed. And I have been, you know, Liz has been in the business 20 years, been in the business longer than I have. And Alex has been around forever too. Well, I just want to nod my cap or whatever that Liz communicated perfectly, directly, and immediately to me.
Yeah, that's great.
handled the last minute of transactions, really making sure her clients were taken care of, handed them over to Alex. I got a call from Alex. I reached out to Liz and Alex about a question that I had. Alex responded in Alex fashion, just like the old days when she was agenting all the time.
Yeah,
I think she's more like sales manager now or something. I'm not
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
And it was seamless. And I just want to nod. I want to give a nod to these particular brokers for that. I don't have any opinion about Redfin as an
yeah,
agency. I have an
yeah,
opinion about these brokers, and they're great, and I appreciate
yeah.
it.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's
so
fantastic. That's
no break in flow yet. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's awesome.
I have to wonder how much change in confidence that brings to the buyer side. I don't know. I know a buyer in this market is going to have 1% or 12% or whatever it is, sort of fear factor. And I
Yeah,
got to wonder if their agents shifting is another part of a greater narrative or story. I think that like our job is always controlling this like inner false narrative
yeah,
and coming back to like, well, here's the truth. I mean, here's,
yeah,
you can have that story, but it's not real. Here's what's real.
yeah.
And that's why, and I think our entire economic system is that way. So I mean, don't get me started on that, but it's just,
We'll reel you back in.
yeah.
I talked to an agent early this morning. She let me know there were 15 homes on, I don't know if you saw the listing in Richmond for 640, but only 1,000 square feet on the main 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and then 1 bedroom, 1 bath in the basement, but 15 offers yesterday.
That's Callie's listing.
Um, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whose was. I just talked to the
I
buyers.
think that, is it the cute one with the little horizontal and the little like studio thing in the garage?
Super cute. Yeah, super cute.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Small, but
That's Callie's listing.
yeah.
Yeah, that surprises me.
Yeah, dialed in, priced really well. Like no one, I mean, I think that she had flawless pricing. Like that was the value of the house. And to see 15 offers just tells me like, that wasn't it, it's not, she didn't price it like a deal. She priced it like that's where it should have gone. And to have 15 people come in and make offers is interesting. And I think we see that in the Altos numbers that we're continuing to be in a pretty strong seller's market. And we just don't have the inventory. And if something's good and it hits, we've still got buyers competing. I talked to our coast agents yesterday. I talked to two of the different coast agents there, and they were still showing, but their biggest problem themselves too was that they've like, we're showing and people want to buy, not, it's slowing for sure, but like we only have like 8 properties down here to show anybody. So
Mm-hmm.
they're really struggling with inventory. And then what was interesting too to talk to them is like we're not really even into our season yet. This is still very early for us.
This is super for them, yeah.
So we don't know. And they've got a lot of people, second homeowners that have gone there to live there, and that they're calling it pandemic in paradise down there. It's a beautiful place to be. And we also had another agent call me this morning and let me know that she just talked to second home buyer, and the second home buyer said, I'm mindful of what's going on in the world, no disrespect, but I have a stable job. I have saved money. I see interest rates are low, and this seems like the time for me to strike. So I would like, I'd like to engage you. I'd like to start looking. So I think that's also interesting as we see these other people kind of sat on the sidelines that had a lot of choice and money, like come in, and is that as big of the market as just like your average confident buyer? It's like, of course we're going to see any market that shifts, you see all these side markets that come in and activate, but it's, what kind of balance are we going to find? And the Altos report for this week was at 54, which is over last month, which was at 52. But when we started this thing,
For your average listener, explain what that 54 and 52 is.
Oh yeah, so that is the measurement of the demand against inventory. So it's kind of like it's a speedometer, and we watch it every week. And as we came in, as in February, March, it was in the low 50s, which is on the speedometer.
It was low 60s.
Pretty high. Well, that was when we started in the pandemic. So February, and like coming into February, it was in the low 50s. And then it was in the 50s, and then it spiked to 62 our first week of the pandemic because people were like,
and 62 being starting to look like a buyer's market.
62. No, that's a seller's market. That's like that's going into the red in the seller's market, in just that, like, sellers have all the control. You know, there's buyers that need to buy, and it's a frenzy in
Oh yeah, the 62, the big spike then was that's when a lot of people held back, didn't list a home, and so all of a sudden the supply and demand shift was huge. But that also that big spike didn't account for, I think it probably felt more like a buyer's market for real quick. Anyway, but what it didn't account for is how many people were about to step back, and that stepping back or furlough or whatever, that's the measure that brings that 62 down week over week.
Yep.
And leveling back out to about where we were kind of coming into it.
Yeah, but which was still a pretty extreme seller's market.
Right.
So, you know, so 60, so it went down to 60, went to 58, and now it's at 54 this week, which is still above where we were last month.
That 58 to 54, that like 62, 60, 58, 54 in that data, that is really interesting to me. If that continues to level and then sort of like creep back up, I anticipate, here's my prophecy for next week, we'll be talking, that number will actually go up next week. And here's why. I have not seen this influx of new properties like we saw in the early days. The early days, like 3 weeks ago.
The good old days.
Yeah, the good old days 3 weeks ago. But we have not seen that week after week after week. We've seen more of a steadying inventory. We saw a huge dump right away. I think Cody had measured 200 or whatever. That was in that Oregonian article. But then what we're seeing now is a steady increase. I'm very interested to see next week if the prophecy holds true, which is that number will go back up. And that, what that says is that is like an underlying recovery. It is not saying that this is easy and piece of cake and slamming and yada, yada, yada. What it's saying is that the supply and demand is the heart of any question about how's the market. It's always the same question. What's the supply? What's the demand? And that's it. That's the root question. If there's only one buyer in the market, it can still be a hot market. It can be a buyer's market if there's 10 wonderful properties that buyer wants to buy and can't make a choice. Or it can be a seller's market if there's 100 properties on the market, but only one of them is the one that the buyer wants, and that's actually a seller's market. So it is actually just a supply and demand question. And so if that number, that Altos number, goes up again next week, this will be like sort of like that's the energy of spring and the energy of Portland and the energy of flattening the curve and the energy of people's confidence in a restoration of our market, etc.
Yeah. And I think, and honestly, I think the number that you're looking, that we would see, it might be next week, or it might be the week after too. I mean, it'll be interesting. This is just so fun. It's like day by day, week by week. I had a friend ask me, what are you looking forward to the most? And I was like, tomorrow? Like, it's just hard to get out of like the just right now thinking. But inventory's held steady and home sales have outstripped demand. And so how does that change? Will we see a difference? What are you seeing from lenders? What are they saying just as far as
let's see, 2 updates. Well, we had a great conversation most of the agent body at Living Room is going to have access to and already been a part of or listens to Steph's conversation. So that's probably the most up to date. I would only add that FHA loans are, the update I have today from one of my lenders is that jumbos are again, the same story there. They're not coming back in the market anytime real soon. Also, employment verification, super important, both as a listing agent and a buyer's agent. We want to know that they have employment and that they don't have any layoffs or furloughs that they're not considering as a big deal. Like, some people just consider their income like, dude, I get more in unemployment than I had before, and all my job's coming back and whatever. They don't even consider that actually might affect your loan. The other piece, and it does. So if you're the buyer's agent, obviously you need to know that about your buyer. If you're the seller's agent, make sure you're asking lots of questions and talking with the lender. I will say we are seeing a lot more appraisal waivers, just like we were talking about. They're happening. I've been seeing them, so I know it's a real thing. They are happening, and it does smooth out their transactions. Certainly, it can cut a week of time off of the transaction, if not more. So my timeline so far have been steady and closing on time. The challenges have been kind of few. I haven't seen a ton of inter-transaction challenge around COVID related stuff. I've seen some, but not much. Only one on the listing side and one on the buyer side in the last month that I can think of on our team. my lender that I was talking to this morning says they've had a couple, and here's what they are, and they're all employment. They're all just employment based.
Mm-hmm.
So the story that plays out in the next month, I think, is all about the underlying, the PPP and furloughs and layoffs. And I mean, 16 million unemployed is I don't know if you've seen the chart on that. It's absolutely crazy. Like the chart looks like, here's the spike in 09, and then it's like, wow, like on one chart, it's like it's the definition of unprecedented.
Yeah.
And what's really weird about it, I'll just throw this macroeconomics in for a second, is we know it's coming. The Feds, albeit in some opinions, are spending too much, in some opinions not enough, not too soon, too late, whatever. Point is that money is going out there, and it is feeding into an unemployment track that we know is there, we know is temporary, we know how people get back to work. And the reason they found the extra $600 a month, which is generally speaking a disincentivization for people to go back to work. So that's why unemployment values are really low. That's why you can't live on unemployment. It's meant to be that way. It's meant to be a suffering wage, so people are incentivized to go back to work. The reason it's high is because people actually want to go back to work, and there's a reason they're out of work, and it's not because they don't love their job and can't find a good one. It's because they want to go back to the job they were in, and as soon as they can, they will. So in the interim, the Feds are helping them stay there by increasing unemployment. So probably there will be very little backlash from those that are furloughed, laid off, and then return to work in terms of their purchasability and their lendability.
Yeah.
So we will probably see a very big burst, or that would indicate that we are more likely, I don't know about yes or no, but more likely to have a big burst of energy in the market, specifically buyer, demand, as there's no date, but as we fade out of COVID time, we should have a pretty big burst. So
yeah,
stay connected to your people.
Yeah, I put in an offer on an investment property yesterday. I started talking to my lender earlier in the week, and I was like, what are non-owner occupied loans looking like? And I was a little disappointed initially because, there's some great rates for owner occupied right now. And non-owner occupied, I felt pretty lucky in the beginning. I quoted 4.25, but by the end of the week, we were at 3.8. So, that was interesting, just like the shift there. And, I was asking him, like, how are applying for the PPP, or, doing these different things, or is this affect, is going to affect the loan? And he was like, they're still looking at the same things. It's like you said, it just comes down to employment, steady employment. The last 12 months of your income. And so that was eye-opening for me. The other thing I thought was really, really interesting that I looked at was that this week last year compared to this week this year, we were down sales, like sold units, by 14% house-wise, like unit-wise, but only 6% total volume. And last year we had some issues with inventory too, but it just really blows my mind that a pandemic, unemployment, the PPP, like everything you think of that's going on this last week, and and this is the week before this week. So I think that was like the height, I think, of a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, that our market would have seen only 6% effect in total volume. Was just like,
it's actually astonishing. I totally agree.
Astonishing.
This is why I have a house listing today at 475 in Sherwood, and why I have a house at 600 next Friday in a beautiful 4-bedroom up farmhouse with unpainted woodwork and a little studio outside in St. John's. Call me if you want. The reason we have these listing and not on hold for 4 months and not trying again later or whatever is not because like, oh, it's all going to go to shit, let's get it on the market right away. I think there's a lot of people that made that decision a few weeks ago. Who knows, get it done now. I don't think that's why we're doing it. What we're doing now is saying, if we're going to sell this year, now is as good of time as any. There may or may not be a bump in pricing related to the bump in there may or may not be a bump in pricing related to the bump in demand in a couple months as we're on the other side of it. As we come out on the other side of this, there may or may not be. But there is in these two particular areas where I'm listing, there is actually a real decrease in supply and there is some demand. So it's
Yeah.
all about relativity. It's not an absolute number. The strength of the market is never absolute. It's a relative number. It's supply relative to demand or vice versa. It's not in a vacuum. It's not less buyers. It's less buyers as related to the demand. It's always a relationship. It's not one or the other. And I think it's really important as a listing agent to look at the area you're in. Are there 15 houses that just came on the market? It doesn't really matter how good rates are and how many buyers are out there. You're going to have a real hard time. If there's 15 houses that just hit, they're all priced pretty well and not going. Well, what the market is telling you is supply is really low specifically for that neighborhood right now.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why jump in there with the highest price property? It doesn't matter how strong the market is. That's me thinking it doesn't work. It's relative. Likewise, there's basically nothing except for a couple of weird looking new constructions in St. John's right now between 550 and 650. And there's examples of other farmhouses that have sold a little higher than this one, and 599 is like, it looks like a value price for this awesome property.
Yeah.
And my guess is there's a couple people that are going to jump on it, kind of like the 15 offers in Alpha Division and Callie's listing what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Supply and demand, but it's like, it's not rocket science, but it does take like actually looking at the right data, not just generally data, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of good, it's kind of bad. Like, that's not a market analysis.
Yeah. Week by week. Well, thank you for your time and your expertise, and a great reminder for all of us out there working in the market, the value that we bring around being able to decipher the market and do market analysis and lead our clients through the journey to make their goals happen. And I really appreciate you taking the time for the conversation, Karim.